Well, hello and welcome to this week's Sunday Chat here on Big Country Politics. I am Manny Diaz. This week's special guest is none other than our congressman, representing District 19, Mr. Jodey Arrington. Jodey, thanks so much. We see you so much on Zoom. It's rare that we get to get you in person, but we're going to seize the moment today.
Well, I prefer to be here in person. As you can imagine, for my mental health, I want to spend less time in Washington and more time in West Texas, but it's always good to be back home in God's country, and it's always an honor to fight the good fight on behalf of the people here in Abilene, the big country, in our nation's capital, and there's always a lot going on.
Oh, most definitely. Well, the 118th Congress officially got underway back in January, but of course, you know, as you're here with us today, we have a lot to talk about today, beginning with your selection as chairman of the House Budget Committee. For the first time since the 116th Congress, a Republican has been chair of this particular committee. First and foremost, tell us what that was like to be selected as chair of this particular committee.
Well, it's a huge honor because it is a tremendous responsibility. One of the most important things we do, and it's a constitutional responsibility, is to resource the government and to make sure that the priorities of the United States are reflected in the budget. The problem is our budget is broken, the process is broken, the country is heading towards bankruptcy, essentially, because we're spending more than we're bringing in revenue. That's a deficit. And the cumulative effect of every year having a deficit has amounted or has amassed in a $31 trillion national debt, which is the highest debt per GDP, per the size of our economy in the history of the United States. So we're on some very tenuous fiscal footing. We're on an unsustainable debt trajectory, and I get to lead the charge for the conference and for Congress to restore fiscal sanity in Washington. The process was like running for Congress in West Texas, but I'm running for a chairmanship among at least 222 other Republicans since we are in the majority. And there are only 12 chairmanship positions. To me, the budget is the most important because it affects every program, every department, from defense to agriculture, and I think our longest term, greatest threat is a financial related or debt crisis, and we have to intervene now or our children unfortunately will inherit a weaker country and a worse economy if we don't. So I'm excited about the opportunity.
Well, speaking of that, you know, the U.S. national debt is $31 trillion and growing. You've said this committee will not let politicians bankrupt our country and destroy our children's future, as you just said. No new credit cards until Democrats agree to spending constraints and other fiscal reforms. How do you and this committee plan to wrangle in spending while paying our debts and protecting the credit of the United States?
Well, we've got to get our fiscal house in order as Republicans. Let me say from the outset, Republicans have contributed their fair share to our fiscal mess and to this national debt. I think most recently, it's been President Biden and Democrats. We've seen $5 trillion in just 2 years. In addition to the inflation and the soaring interest rates, we've seen an exponential increase in our deficits and our national debt. The projections by the Congressional Budget Office for our annual deficits. Today, it's about $1.5 trillion. That's what we don't take in revenue that we have to pay on account of the size of our government. In 10 years, that will be $3 trillion. It will triple. And in 10 years, we'll spend more on just servicing the debt, that is interest payments, which will be over $1 trillion, than all of national defense, than we spend on veterans and health services, all the above combined. That's unacceptable. It's unsustainable. And we have to rein in the spending, number one. And then we have to restore regular order. I mean, we do these end of the year omnibus bills, these massive spending bills. Nobody can read them in time. They're just thrown down on the desks of members of Congress 48 hours before we vote. We need to go through regular order. We need responsible budgets. We need to enforce those budgets. And then we need to start going after the things that are really driving the debt, which is mandatory spending, which is 70% of the budget. And there's a lot of work to be done. It's not going to be overnight. We were in this kind of debt after World War II. That's the only time we've been indebted at this level. And we were able to bring the spending down while growing the economy. And in time, we restored fiscal responsibility. That same strategy is what we're going to have to do today. And again, we have to start with our Republicans who have the leadership and have the gavel and who the American people put in the majority. But at some point, it's got to be all members of Congress.
Right. I do have to ask this because we've heard this in the State of the Union. President Biden says Republicans want to cut Social Security and Medicare. For the record, you are a conservative. You are a Republican.
Yes.
Is that true?
No, it's not true. And just a few points. Number one, we want to strengthen and save those programs because health care and retirement security in the form of Medicare and Social Security are critical safety nets for seniors. That we don't need to just protect them for seniors today. We have to strengthen them for the seniors of tomorrow. Work has to be done on it because in the next 10-year budget window, there's going to be an insolvency issue with both of those programs. So Republicans and Democrats, as we've done in the past, have to get in a room, act like adults, and find consensus solutions to the solvency issues within those programs. But those are off the table in terms of the debt ceiling negotiation, and there's certainly no cuts that are being considered. This president in the past, I remind you, has talked about freezing spending in those programs, not once, but multiple times. And recently, he's been cutting Medicare Advantage, which half of the Medicare beneficiaries are in that program. It's a privately run program. It offers more benefits, I would argue, better quality of service. So he's already mucking around in Medicare while accusing Republicans of cutting it, which couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, coming up after the break, more from Congressman Jodey Arrington on how he looks to hold riders across America accountable along with pro-energy bipartisan agenda. Bipartisan agenda and energy. You want to stay tuned for that. That and more coming up on Big Country Politics. Well, welcome back to Big Country Politics. I'm Manny Diaz, this week's guest for our Sunday conversation. Jodey Arrington, our District 19 Congressman. Mr. Arrington, we talked so much about your new chair, the new committee that you'll be leading in the first segment. But let's kind of shift gears and let's talk about some bills, this pieces of legislation that that you're reintroducing, if you will. You can't drive too far here in West Texas without seeing some sort of production of energy in conjunction with fellow Republican Carol Miller and Democrats Henry Cuellar and Lou Correa. You have reintroduced the Congressional Energy Export Caucus. Explain what this is and what it means for American energy, especially what comes from right here in West Texas.
Well, West Texas is the capital of energy production. I mean, we are the food, fuel, and fiber capital of the world. And we not only provide low, affordable, and abundant supply of energy to consumers across America and energy independence to our nation, which is a pillar for national security, but we also provide that clean, low-cost fuel to allies around the world. And one example of an ally who desperately needs our LNG, or liquefied natural gas, is Europe. They are having trouble, as you know, with Russia, who's been a major provider of fossil fuels to the countries represented in the European Union. And Russia's holding out because of the conflict in Ukraine and the tensions that has created. This is why America can never be dependent on another country or other sources outside of our domestic production, because you'll be held hostage. It will be used as a geopolitical baseball bat, like Putin is doing to Germany and other countries. We need to focus on trade deals and infrastructure investment like LNG terminals across the country, ports like the Port of Houston and Galveston. See, we're upstream We got to help the downstream guys and the transmission of this product so that we can benefit economically and so that our allies can benefit from a national security perspective. So I'm proud to work with Henry Cuellar, Lou Correa, my two Democrat colleagues, and Carol Miller from West Virginia. All of us are pro-American energy, and we're going to have to continue to promote that in the face of, I think, some hostility from this current administration on fossil fuels. In the name of climate protection, in the name of the environmental stewardship, we ought to be able to steward the environment while making sure that we produce our God-given resources and that we fuel this greatest economy in the world.
Definitely.
And all these other things. We can do it. I haven't seen that approach from this administration, but that's why we have bipartisan groups like this.
Absolutely. Well, you have also reintroduced the David Dorn Act of 2023 that would double the imprisonment for rioting, along with the Patrick Underwood Federal Law Enforcement Protection Act of 2023 that would increase penalties for assaults on federal officers. How confident are you that the second time is the charm for these pieces of legislation?
Well, I think I'm more confident we can get it passed because Republicans are in the majority, and one of our priorities in this Congress is to restore law and order. I think that there's a sense of lawlessness and there are threats to public safety that we haven't experienced as a country in many years. Crime is at an all-time high, at least in recent history. The border is a part of that lawlessness, and the crime and drugs pouring across the border is a problem. But in this case, what we tried to do was look at the federal laws and say, how do we deter these violent riots, and how do we hold criminals accountable who assault or, unfortunately, in the case of David Dorn and Patrick Underwood, kill federal law enforcement officers. And so we upped the ante for those who would perpetrate crimes against law enforcement officers. And we're sending a message that, we won't tolerate this, that law-abiding citizens are counting on their leaders to provide safety, to provide rule of law, and to hold criminals accountable. That's not happening enough. This is what we thought we could do to improve things and to send a message and to stand on the principles that I think West Texans expect, not only from their members of Congress, their representatives, but from their great country.
Well, over the last week and change, we've heard of a number of objects in the sky shot down. I mean, it's wild to see. First, a balloon just floats right across the country. Then we're seeing, fighters just shooting down willy-nilly. How concerned are you, not only as a member of Congress about what's going on, but just as an American, a West Texan?
I'm very concerned that this administration and the leadership at the Pentagon knew of the first Chinese spy balloon, and we know it's a balloon from China. We'll determine exactly what the intentions were and what the information that's being collected. We know the Chinese are buying up land around military installations. We know that they're using technology to collect information on our citizens. So to be frank, I don't trust them, and I don't trust the communist Chinese. But this administration allowed this Chinese spy balloon to just drift across the continental United States without any intervention or any plan to intercept it. That is unacceptable. So there will have to be answers from this administration and the Pentagon, not just on what happened in the debacle in Afghanistan, not just our slow and tepid response to the Russian invasion, but now balloons floating across our country without any plan or engagement. The other balloons we don't know about, but yeah, it's more than curious to me that we're just now picking up all this. I think the question is, are we just now able with technology to detect these things, and are we that vulnerable? And what sort of investments do we need to make to play from behind until we have the military readiness commensurate with the risks out there? That's one thought. The other is, and look, I'm going to be critical of this president as our commander-in-chief. I think the greatest national security risk to our country is the incompetence of our current president and the weakness it's projecting to the world. And that weakness is inviting aggression. It did in Russia, vis-a-vis Ukraine and their unprovoked invasion of that sovereign country. And I worry that there might be a similar play executed by the Chinese in Taiwan. So look, if they can float a balloon across our country, how are we going to stop an intercontinental missile from Iran or from North Korea with a nuclear payload? There are lots of questions. I have them too. The good news is Republicans are in control of the House. We have the subpoena power and we have oversight responsibility, and we're going to exercise that in a robust way. I have no doubt that there will be answers and there will be people who will have to answer and be held accountable as a result. So stay tuned. There's a long list of the issues where this administration has to be accountable. This is going to be added to that.
Well, definitely. Well, Congressman, thank you so much for
Manny.
joining us.
Good to be with you.
It's always a treat to chat with you.
God bless.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, for Congressman Jodey Arrington, representing District 19 here in the Big Country, much of the Lubbock area, I am Manny Diaz, and this has been another Sunday Chat right here on Big Country Politics.